Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to day 50. Finally, we're finishing book one, and today we're just kind of wrapping up some various issues related to different uses of the infinitive and also different types of clause, right? Subordinate clauses. So let's start out by talking about the infinitive, right? We all know what that is by now, and we've used infinitives in all sorts of situations. And one point to make generally about infinitives is that wherever you're using an infinitive in English, right, like to work, it's very likely you're going to get an infinitive in Russian. So this is one area where, generally speaking, the use of the grammar uh, corresponds pretty nicely between Russian and English. So take a simple example like I want to work. Я хочу работать, right? Я хочу, and then we're following that in Russian with to work, работать, the infinitive. So all the examples, whenever you see an infinitive in Russian, you may look, can we translate this as an infinitive into English? And usually the answer will be yes. So let's look at some examples. Я хочу читать. I want to read. Мне нравится читать. I like to read, right? Or if we unwrap that idiom, to read is pleasing to me, right? But in either case, читать, we get an infinitive for that in English as well. I like to read. Or I need to read an article, right? Мне надо прочитать статью. There with one of those modal adverbs like надо, right? It is necessary for me to read an article, right? We could unpack it that way. Let's look at some simpler, just subjectless constructions that can, again, be used with the dative. We can't use them with the nominative. For example, что делать is a common question. Что делать, right? Literally, what to do. What to do, or what is to be done, what can one do, what should we do, right? Anything like that. But in Russian, simply что делать. Okay, what if we want to specify for whom? We're asking for whom, or more literally, what is to do for us, I guess, if we try to unpack that, right? What to do for us. Or, more translating more loosely, what are we to do? What should we do? Что нам делать? Что нам делать? Past tense, that would be что нам было делать, right? What were we to do, right? So there you see with the было that that's underscoring the fact that this is a subjectless construction, and therefore the conjugated verb there, было, in the past, it looks like a neuter singular verb form. So some other examples. Как знать, literally how to know, right? Or how can one know? Как знать. Мне как знать, right? How am I supposed to know, right? Again, subjectless, we're throwing in a dative pronoun. Как мне было знать? How was I to know, right? Okay, so these are some fairly simple examples, but you see that they're maybe a little bit tricky. First of all, they're subjectless, which makes them inherently kind of weird, vis-a-vis English. If we look at a poster here, от народной мести не уйти врагу. So literally, not to go away or not to escape for the enemy from popular vengeance, from the people's vengeance. Okay, so again, it's kind of very awkward to try to translate that literally. It doesn't quite work out. So we have to maybe flip it a little bit in English and use enemy as the subject, right? The enemy will not escape. Or maybe it is not for the enemy to escape the vengeance of the people. Okay, so that's a really good example to look at. All these examples are, again, they're quite simple on the one hand, but a little bit difficult to translate and maybe to get a handle on the meaning of the Russian, even though, again, the Russian constructions are extremely simple. We can also use infinitives, remember, after чтобы. I think we may have seen that already, right? In order to. For example, чтобы строить, надо знать. Чтобы знать, надо учиться. In order to build, one must know. In order to know, one must study. Okay, let's look at some more examples with the just infinitives and then datives, right, in these impersonal constructions. Что ему делать? What is he to do? Right, what to do for him, I guess we could say literally. Кого ей спросить? Whom is she to ask? Right, whom to ask for her? Right, who can she ask? Whom can she ask? Где мне работать? Where am I to work? Right, where to work for me or something. Where to me to work? Какую машину мне купить? What kind of car am I to buy? What kind of car should I buy? Нам не понять почему. It's not for us to understand why. Не нам это знать, right? We can't know this. Maybe other people can know it, but that's not for us to know, right? We could say. Врагу не уйти, again, following the poster. The enemy cannot escape. It is not for the enemy to escape, maybe the most literal way we can do that in English, of course, introducing it, right? Introducing a dummy subject. Okay, so again, that's a fairly slippery little bit of grammar, even though the Russian grammar is actually very simple here. Okay, let's translate a few of these. Where are we to work? Где нам работать? Где нам работать? What should I talk about? О чем мне говорить? О чем мне говорить? Number 3, what was I to think? Что мне было думать? Right? Что мне было думать? Number 4, to ask or not to ask. Спросить ее или не спросить? Right? To ask or not to ask. Спросить или не спросить? Спросить ее или не спросить? 5, what kind of film should we watch? Какой фильм нам посмотреть? Right? Какой фильм нам посмотреть? 6, whose article should we read? Чью статью нам прочитать? Right? Чью статью, whose article in the accusative, нам, right, dative, прочитать, to read. Now, keep in mind for each of these, there are other ways we could say the same thing in Russian, right? Like we could use nada, right? To speak of necessity. Let's see, we could use должен, if you remember that, right? Should I do this? Should I do that? So anyway, we might be able to think of other ways to get the same idea across, but the examples we gave with the infinitive are probably the simplest way to do it in Russian, right? Infinitive, an infinitive plus a dative. Okay, here's the infinitive with чтобы, right, which we just saw earlier with the poster. Right, чтобы plus an infinitive means in order to. And note carefully that it's simply followed by the infinitive. And keep in mind, if you've studied some Russian already, you may know other constructions with чтобы that are more complicated. We're going to call those hypothetical constructions, and we won't get to those until book 3. Okay, so if you've seen those, just keep in mind those are something separate. What we're looking at right here is just a much, much simpler construction. Чтобы plus the infinitive. It translates very nicely using in order to, right? Чтобы готовить борщ, нужна свекла. In order to cook борщ, in order to prepare борщ, one needs beets, right? Beets are necessary. Beets, by the way, in Russian, свекла is a singular only noun. Чтобы приготовить борщ сегодня, мы должны купить свеклу. Okay, now same thing, but perfected, right? In order to cook борщ tonight, we need to buy some beets. Let's see, another poster. Чтобы больше иметь, надо больше производить. In order to have more, one must, or it is necessary to produce more. Чтобы больше производить, надо больше знать. In order to produce more, it is necessary to know more. Okay, let's translate a few of these. In order to live well, one must have money. Okay, it's a dubious philosophical claim, but let's roll with it. Чтобы жить хорошо, надо иметь деньги, right? It is necessary to have money, right? So again, in order to live, чтобы жить хорошо, надо иметь деньги. Number 2, in order to have money, one must work. Чтобы иметь деньги, надо работать. Right? Чтобы иметь деньги, надо работать. 3, in order to work, one must study. Чтобы работать, надо учиться. Okay, so again, very simple construction, but also quite useful. Let's talk about punctuation just a bit. And, you could talk about punctuation all day, but I just want to give a couple of tips that account for the most common mistakes in punctuation among students, right? Especially speaking of commas, right? So basically, where should we write commas? So the first rule, and this happens all the time, this is by far the most common punctuation mistake. I mean, again, we're talking punctuation, so it's not like, there are worse mistakes you can make, obviously. But anyway, the tendency is for students to put a comma after an introductory phrase, right? An introductory, for example, prepositional phrase. And you're taught to do that in English typically, but Russians almost never do that. Sometimes it will happen, but just as a general rule, as a rule of thumb, don't put a comma after an introductory adverb or prepositional phrase or any other kind of phrase. Okay? Now, the second rule that's really important is that when we're talking about subordinate clauses, right, so secondary clauses in a sentence, those are almost always set off by a comma, right? So let's look at examples. It was it was boring at the party. I wanted to go home. Okay, this is something a little bit different. We'll see examples of the other violations here in a moment. What is this? It was boring at the party. I wanted to go home. Okay, in formal English, that's called a comma splice. Okay, so again, you could say this, and if you were writing sort of more flowing, natural, whatever, stream of consciousness prose or whatever, then you could also presumably print this. But it's called a comma splice in formal English, meaning you're basically joining two independent sentences, two full sentences with a comma, right? And so again, in super formal English, that's considered generally to be a mistake. And so the one solution would be to simply split those into independent sentences, right? With a period, or at the very least, to use a semicolon in place of a comma. Okay, so it was boring at the party, semicolon, I wanted to go home. Or it was boring at the party, period, I wanted to go home. Now you've got the full, these two complete sentences, sort of truly separated by a semicolon or a comma. Now, this is kind of rule number 3. In Russian, comma splices like this are, again, generally speaking, perfectly acceptable. Okay, and the same thing happens, by the way, in French. You may think of other languages where there isn't the strict rule against this use of a comma, right, where you can basically just have a sentence that keeps running on. You have basically complete sentences strung together one after another using commas. So, for example, in Russian, you could say «На вечеринке было скучно, я хотел пойти домой». Okay, so that's perfectly fine in Russian. Again, there's nothing wrong, certainly, with using a period and just splitting it up into two independent sentences. But in any case, this helps explain why semicolons are actually very rare in Russian. You almost never see them, and so students, if you're in love with using semicolons in your writing, resist the urge to use semicolons in Russian. Right? Use a comma or just use a period and split up your long sentence into two separate sentences. Okay, so with those we have 3 sort of rules of thumb there. Let's look at some examples and try to see how we might improve our Russian punctuation. На прошлой неделе я отдыхала в деревне. So last week I was relaxing in the village or in the countryside. Okay, we don't need that comma there, right? That's an introductory prepositional phrase. We're taught usually to put commas after those in English, but we don't really need that in Russian. Right? На прошлой неделе я отдыхала в деревне. Okay, so get rid of the comma. Okay, number 2, another very typical mistake. Завтра, comma, я буду свободна. Okay, here we have an introductory adverb, right? So again, we're taught to use a comma there in English. We don't need that in Russian. It's not, again, like it's some awful mistake, but better to just say «завтра я буду свободна» or «я буду свободна завтра». Again, there are different word orders we could have here. Если хочешь, можно встретиться. Okay, here we have we have an if clause, right? So this isn't just an introductory phrase. We have 2 full clauses, right? If you want, that's a condition clause. Then we have a separate clause after that, можно встретиться. So two full clauses like that, we would usually separate with a comma, almost always in formal Russian. Okay, so number 3, we would keep the comma there. Number 3, я пью воду, потому что пить хочется. Okay, look where the comma is. This is a very common mistake. Now, I should say just very quickly that you can see потому, comma, что. That construction does exist. I don't want to talk about it right now because it's just sort of beyond our scope at this point. Usually when we're using потому что, we're using it simply to mean because, right? Just simply because. Okay, that's a phrase. Those 2 words go together. So the comma should come before the потому. Okay, so this is another very common mistake. I think the reason is people know that you can begin a clause with что, right? Like I know that, blah, blah, blah. Я знаю, comma, что. And so they want to put the comma in front of the что. But here we don't have simply что, we have потому что. That together means because, right? It opens up its own clause. And so as always in Russian, we want to separate clauses like that using a comma. Я пью воду, comma, I drink water, comma, because I want to drink, I'm thirsty. Okay, number 4. Когда я голоден, я обычно ем шоколад. Okay, that's correct because again we have two full clauses. We have a when clause, when I am hungry, comma, I usually eat chocolate. Number 5. Они знают, что я не люблю этого писателя. They know that I don't love this author. Okay, now in English we typically would not put a comma in front of the that, right? We use that clauses all the time like that, and we don't typically separate them with a comma. But again, in Russian, you almost always would. Я знаю, comma, что я не люблю этого писателя. I know that I don't love this author. We're setting off that что clause with a comma. Number 6. Ты не скажешь, где он живет? Will you not say where he lives? Okay, a reported question, right? So we have a subordinate clause, a где clause. We want to separate that with a comma. Ты не скажешь, comma, где он живет? Right? Will you not tell, comma, where he lives? 7. Мы не знаем, когда он придет. Again, a reported question. Мы не знаем, comma, когда он придет. Number 8. В нашем городе есть большой парк. Okay, again, an introductory prepositional phrase. Usually we would be taught to set that off with a comma in English. We don't need it here in Russian. So get rid of the comma. В нашем городе есть большой парк. Okay, let's quickly review some just basic types of subordinate clause that most of these we've seen already. Let's just look at examples. We've seen that clauses with unstressed что. Right? Я знаю, что тебе надо работать. Right? I know that. Right? So again, this is corresponding to English that. Хорошо, что зонт есть. Right? It's good that there's an umbrella. Indirect questions, right? Or reported questions. Я знаю, что ты сделал. Они спросили, где мы живем. Right? Now there, note that the что is stressed. Right? I know what you've done. It's not a that clause with unstressed что. Я знаю, что тебе надо работать. But a reported question. Я знаю, что ты сделал. Они спросили, где мы живем. Right? They asked where we lived. When clauses with когда. Когда я голоден, я ем торт. Мне грустно, когда идет дождь. Why clauses. Профессор спросил, почему я не прочитал статью. Okay, that's also a kind of reported question, an indirect question. Anyway, we can also have because clauses. Я не прочитал статью, comma, right? Note the comma position. Потому что моя собака ее съела. I hadn't read the article because my dog ate it. Okay, who or which clauses with который. Let's start out with the which clause. Я не прочитал статью, которую я должен был прочитать. I didn't read the article which I was supposed to read, or again, in modern English, that's almost always going to end up as that, right? I didn't read the article that I was supposed to read. Okay, so который, again, we usually say this opens who or which clauses. Here's an example of a who clause. Мой друг, который учится в России, скучает по своей собаке. My friend who is studying in Russia misses his dog. And as we've just seen, чтобы plus an infinitive can give us an in order to clause, right? Чтобы иметь деньги, надо работать. Okay, so there's just kind of an overview of some different clauses we've seen. And of course, as you advance in Russian and start seeing more complex sentences with multiple clauses, right, this is an important thing to take note of, right? All the different kinds of clauses you can have. And of course, we're going to learn more types of, more sophisticated types of clause later. Here's a common issue, right? How to translate English so. Well, we know the demonstrative adjective такой, right, which corresponds to the question word какой, right? Какой meaning what kind of, and такой means, well, such a whatever, right? One like this. Эта машина такая дорогая, right? This car is so expensive. Okay, so there's one use of so with the adjective, right, pairing такая with another adjective. Here we get an adverbial expression, я так хочу ее купить. I so want to buy it, right? So there's a shortened adverbial form to go with the verb, right? I so want. It's so expensive that I can't buy it. Она такая дорогая, что не могу ее купить. Okay, so there's some uses of so, right? Такой or так. Now here's a common mistake, very common. English can also use so to open a subordinate clause, right? a result clause, right? For example, it was raining, comma, so we sat around the house. We sat around at home. Okay, in Russian, we can't use tak for that purpose. We use instead так что, так что мы сидели дома. Okay, so you might want to circle that. Again, this is a very common mistake with students. Шел дождь, так что мы сидели дома. It was raining, right? So, right, the result, so we sat around at home. And note that here the tak что, the so in English is acting as a conjunction, right? Not as, it's not modifying an adjective or a verb. It's introducing a clause, right? It's a conjunction. Я работаю сегодня, так что я не могу танцевать. Okay, let's look at indirect questions with li. We'll talk about this more later. Li basically means whether, right? So we can have reported questions. We saw how you can report a question earlier by opening the clause with the question word, right? Like I know where he works. Я знаю, где он работает, for example. But what if you want to report a yes-no question, right? Or we could say in English, a weather question. I asked whether she liked kvass, for example, or I asked if she liked kvass. Okay, the problem here basically is that in English, again, we've gotten rather vague in a certain sense, right? We use if to talk about both conditions and to express the idea of whether, right? So we don't really say whether very much in English anymore unless we're being super formal, right? Let's look at an example here. Профессор ее спросил, читает ли она Пушкина. Okay, the English for that is going to be the professor asked her whether or not, right? That's kind of the fullest way to express what we're getting across in Russian. We're asking a yes-no question, right? Whether or not she was reading Pushkin. Was she reading him or was she not, right? It's a yes-no question, a whether question. Okay, the difficulty here is that in English, we'd often say he asked her if she was reading Pushkin, right? But now if in Russian, like if this, then that, right? A kind of a condition statement is going to be если, and we've seen that word already, если. We'll talk more about it in a moment. Okay, so for now we're looking at how to express whether. Okay, so if you remember that in Russian, in any situation where you could use a whether or a whether or not in English, you need to use li, right? This little particle li, which marks a yes-no question. The second point is that it can't come first in its clause. It comes after the main word in the question. Right, so what's the professor asking here? Well, is she reading or is she not reading? So the emphasis of the question is on the word читает in Russian. That word comes first, then li, and then everything else. Профессор ее спросил, читает ли она Пушкина. Okay, now we could jumble the words around a bit if another word is the point of the question. Maybe the professor knows that she's reading, but she wants to know, is she reading Pushkin or someone else? Okay, now all of a sudden the emphasis is on the word Pushkina. That comes first in the reported question, followed by li. Okay, so this is one area in Russian where you have a very strict word order rule, right? Li can't come first, it comes after the main word in the question, in the reported question. Профессор ее спросил, Пушкина ли она читает? Or, профессор ее спросил, она ли читает Пушкина? Right? Is she the one reading Pushkin? We know someone's reading Pushkin, but is she the one or is it someone else? In that case, ana is the point of the question. That comes first, followed by li. Okay, so here let's take some direct questions, some yes/no questions, and then turn them into subordinate clauses, right, into whether clauses using li. And let's watch out because at least one of these, we don't need li, we're going to need something else. Okay? He's asking whether or not she speaks Russian. Он спрашивал, he was asking whether or not she speaks Russian. Он спрашивал, говорит ли она по-русски, right? Does she speak Russian or not? Okay, so again, usually in most cases, the verb will be the point of the question, although certainly not always. But that's the case here. Говорит ли она по-русски? Number two, will there be a telephone? Will they have a telephone? Okay, will there be or will there not be? The main word is будет. Она хотела знать, будет ли у них телефон. Right? She wanted to know whether or not they'll have a telephone. Number three, есть у нас лекция сегодня? Do we have a lecture tonight? Okay, today or not? So the main word is есть, right? Is there a lecture or is there not? Мы не понимаем, есть ли у нас лекция сегодня или нет, right? Есть ли? Is there or is there not a lecture for us today? Do we have a lecture or do we not have a lecture? Number 4, does he work at all? Right? Does he work or does he not work? Я не знал, работает ли он вообще. Right? I didn't know if he works at all or not. Number 5, where is the umbrella? Okay, here we have a где question, right? This isn't a yes or no question. So to make this a reported question, we don't need a li, right? We basically just start out a new clause with the question word. Как я могу знать, где зонт, right? How can I know where the umbrella is? Number 6, will we watch a movie? Okay, he didn't say whether or not we will watch a movie. Okay, here we have a compound future tense. The будем, the auxiliary verb, is going to be treated as the main word. Он не сказал, будем ли мы смотреть фильм. Да, будем ли мы смотреть фильм. 7, мы должны прочитать эту статью. Should we read this? Are we supposed to read this article? Let's say we forgot to ask whether or not we were supposed to read. Okay, here the key word is должны, right? Supposed. Мы забыли спросить, должны ли мы прочитать эту статью. Number 8, надо заплатить за эту газету. Is it necessary to pay for this newspaper, right? Is it free or is it, do we have to pay for it? Okay, the main word in the question is надо, right? Надо или не надо? Is it necessary or is it not necessary to pay? Не знаю, надо ли заплатить за эту газету. Okay, so let's move from that, right, from whether, which is li in Russian, to if, right, which is если. Okay, so again, if we're saying if, then, right, we're talking about a condition, we need to use если in Russian. Если хочешь говорить по-русски, надо хорошо знать грамматику. And there, the result clause, or, right, the then clause, if you want to speak Russian, then you need to know grammar well. You can have a to opening that clause in Russian, and that's kind of optional, right? Including the to is perhaps a bit more formal. It's certainly possible, but you don't always need it, and typically it would probably be dropped. Okay, now again, these clauses could come in any order, right? You need to read Pushkin if you want to know Russian literature well. Надо читать Пушкина, если хочешь хорошо знать русскую литературу. Now again, note here that this is if then. We're talking about conditions. This has nothing to do here with whether or not, right? This is something completely different. And here we're using если, right? For example, in the poster, если книг читать не будешь, скоро грамоту забудешь. Literally, if you will not read books, you will quickly forget grammar, right? You will soon forget grammar. Well, sorry, it's not grammatica. Sorry, I misspoke. Gramota basically here means literacy, or we would say in English, how to read, right? You'll forget your ability to read if you don't practice reading. Okay, so this is a poster promoting literacy, right? And one thing that definitely happened under communism was an expansion, a dramatic expansion of literacy. Okay, so again, we've seen lots of posters emphasizing education, and also there are quite a few emphasizing literacy. Okay, let's look at a quick point in terms of tense with если. Look at these English examples. If it rains tomorrow, we'll watch TV. Okay, what we really mean is if it will rain tomorrow, we will watch TV, right? We're really talking about a future condition. Okay, if we're talking about a future event in Russian, chances are fairly good that we're going to use a future tense verb. Now, we saw a few exceptions with that in terms of talking about the near future, but if here we're talking about если clauses, right, if clauses. If we're talking about a future if, then we need a future tense verb in Russian. So если будет дождь, будем смотреть телевизор, right? Literally, if there will be rain, right, then we will watch television, right? So that's something to watch out for in terms of tense usage in Russian versus English. Okay, let's look at a few other examples. Если не буду занят, мы сможем посмотреть фильм. Literally, if I will not be busy, we'll be able to watch a film. Okay, so again, that's different from what we usually say in English. We say, if I'm not busy, we'll watch a film, right? Если можно будет, я куплю русскую книгу. If it will be possible, literally, in the Russian, right? Russian is literally future tense. But in English, we'd probably say something like, if I can, I'll buy a Russian book, right? We use present tense. Я скажу ему завтра, если его увижу. I'll tell him tomorrow if I will see him, right? In English, of course, we'd say, I'll tell him if I see him. And finally, если забудешь это слово, то спроси у профессора. If you will forget this word, ask the professor. In English, we would say, if you forget the word, right? Okay, so kind of some subtle things we do it in English without really giving much thought to it. But in Russian, in some cases, we'll use tenses a bit differently than we usually do in English. Okay, so let's give a few of these examples. Okay, these talk about present conditions. So here, this is fairly simple. We'll use present tense verbs, of course. If you want a new car, you have to work. Если хочешь новую машину, тебе надо работать, right? Or simply надо работать. Number two, if he wants to read, he should buy a book. Если он хочет читать, он должен купить книгу, or ему надо купить книгу. Okay, again, everything present tense. It's good if you have an umbrella. Хорошо, если у тебя есть зонт. Right? Хорошо, если есть зонт. Number four, if you love your mom, you'll pay for her coffee. Okay, and this is kind of, again, a general statement, right? If you love mom, well, then you pay for her coffee. Okay, если ты любишь маму, okay, sorry, I misspoke a little bit. The если clause, the if clause here is present tense. If you love your mom, right? Kind of a general statement. Then we get the specific idea. Then you'll pay for her coffee. Если ты любишь маму, ты будешь платить за ее кофе. Okay, that would be a general statement. You will always pay for her coffee repeatedly, habitually, or if it's a one-time situation, we'd use a perfective. Right? Если ты любишь маму, ты заплатишь за ее кофе. 5. Buy a ticket to the theater if you want. Okay, imperative. Купи билет в театр, если хочешь. Right? If you want. Present tense. Help me if you can. Помоги мне, если можешь. Okay, so those are all pretty simple because, again, we're generally talking about present conditions, right? So we got a bunch of present tense verbs. Now, here's the tricky thing. If we're talking about future conditions, we need to keep those literally future tense in Russian. If you ask me, I'll answer, right? Если ты меня спросишь, я отвечу. Okay, so if you ask me a question, I'll answer. Если ты меня спросишь, that's a future tense perfective verb, right? Sounds like a one-time situation here we're talking about. Number two, it will be good if we have an umbrella. Будет хорошо, если у нас будет зонт. Right? Будет хорошо, right? It will be good, если у нас будет зонт. If an umbrella will be at us, literally. Number three, if we're free, we can go to a ballet tomorrow. Okay, again, we want to say literally if we will be free. Если мы будем свободны, мы сможем пойти на балет завтра. Number four, I'll buy you a ticket if I can. Я куплю тебе билет, если я смогу. If I will be able. And note there are some examples of something we haven't seen a whole lot of, right? Perfective future tense of the verb to be able, which comes in a pair like most verbs, right? Moch, smoch, right? You almost never hear that in the infinitive, but the infinitive does exist. At any rate, we conjugate the perfective infinitive smoch to get future perfective verbs, right? Если я смогу, if I will be able, again, referring to a one-time possibility, a one-time situation. Okay, that's it. That concludes day 50, and thereby we've now concluded our journey through book 1. So we'll pick up with book number 2 on day 51, we'll call it. We'll just keep marching ahead with our days to give us more of a sense of progress, hopefully, right? And we'll keep marching forward, right? So вперед, товарищи, к новым победам, onward to new victories. Until then, до свидания.